We spend so much time looking at the big, obvious players, nations, corporations. What about these massive movements of people, the ones quietly reshaping our world?
Yeah, it's a fascinating angle.
Okay, let's unpack this, because today we're taking a deep dive into a truly huge global phenomenon that, well, often flies under the radar, the Chinese diaspora.
It really does.
We're talking about at least 36 million people spread across the globe, maybe more, and potentially representing an economic force even bigger than mainland China itself.
That statistic alone is pretty staggering, isn't it?
It really is. It makes you think, especially when you compare it to how much we discuss, say, other global diasporas.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating here, based on Alan Ye's work that we're looking at, isn't just the sheer number. It's the long history and the incredible geographical reach.
Right.
China's story is immense on its own, but this global scattering, it gives you this panoramic view of migration, of influence.
Mm.
And as we'll get into, it's an influence that goes way beyond just population size.
Absolutely. So our goal for you today is to, well, get a solid grasp on this pretty expansive topic. Efficiently, effectively.
Cut to the complexity a bit.
Exactly. We want to give you the key insights, the history, where things stand now, and some genuinely surprising aspects of this global force without, drowning you in data.
And yet it provides a really helpful framework for that, doesn't he? Those 4 waves of immigration.
Yes. That structure is key. It really helps to kind of anchor the whole story. Should we walk through those quickly?
Yeah, good idea. So the first one Ye identifies is the Huasheng. That's the Chinese trader.
Okay.
This was largely voluntary, spanning centuries, actually. You had artisans, merchants setting up communities, especially across Southeast Asia.
So pioneers laying down roots, building networks.
Exactly. Crucial economic and social foundations, often centuries ago.
Then comes the second wave, the Huagong, the Chinese coolie.
Right. And this is a much more difficult period, marked by indentured servitude, mainly to the Americas, Australia.
Links to things like gold rushes, right? Hard manual labor.
Precisely. Intense labor demands. But interestingly, this wave was also fundamental in creating many of the Chinatowns we still see today.
Ah, so these became like vital cultural hubs.
Anchors.
Definitely.
Places of community and support.
Okay, so after the Huagong.
Then we see the Huaqiao. The Chinese sojourner, this is more recent, represents a significant outflow of highly educated Chinese individuals.
Seeking opportunities, often in the West. Like a brain drain.
You can sort of see it that way initially. People bringing considerable expertise, cultural richness. Think of figures like Gao Xingjian, the Nobel laureate, or maybe the director Ang Lee. They kind of fit this wave.
Gotcha. Highly skilled, influential individuals. Okay, and the fourth wave?
The Hawaii. Now, this is interesting. It refers to people of Chinese descent, but born outside China, who then migrate between other non-Chinese nations.
Oh, okay, so not coming directly from China.
Right. Think of someone like Dr. Patrick Soojang,
Wow.
Hugely successful medical innovator, born in South Africa, lived in Canada, now in the U.S.
Wow. Or Yo-Yo Ma, the cellist.
Exactly. Born in France, based in the U.S. Their global journeys really exemplify this more fluid sort of re-migrant part of the diaspora.
So it's clear this isn't just one single group. It's complex, woven from these different strands, these different histories.
Absolutely. Understanding these waves helps appreciate the diverse experiences, the different levels of integration you find. It's not just one story.
Okay, so let's zoom in on the present day then. The scale, the distribution. Where are these communities mainly concentrated? It might not be where people first assume.
That's a key point he makes.
Yeah.
While we might think of Chinatowns in, say, North America or Europe, the vast majority are actually in Southeast Asia.
Right. Countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand.
Vietnam, the Philippines, huge populations there.
And their economic impact in Southeast Asia is significant, isn't it?
Oh, hugely significant. It's quite striking.
Right.
Yes, data shows that even when there are a relatively small percentage of the population in Indonesia, the Philippines, Thailand, Malaysia, the Chinese communities often control a disproportionately massive share of the private domestic capital.
Wow. How does that happen?
Well, it often stems from those early entrepreneurial advantages we mentioned, the Huasheng legacy, plus really strong internal networks within the diaspora. It creates both, opportunities, but also raises questions about wealth distribution that probably delves into.
It really makes you rethink the economic landscape of those countries. And it's not just Southeast Asia, is it?
No, not at all. There are also significant long-established communities in Latin America.
Okay.
And we're seeing a growing presence across various African nations, too. It's truly global.
And what about places like Singapore, Hong Kong, Taiwan, the little tigers?
Yeah, that what points to them as prime examples. Territories with predominantly diaspora Chinese populations that achieved incredible economic growth.
Right.
Their success models even influence policies in places like Central America, showing that global ripple effect.
Okay, so the economic clout is undeniable, but the influence goes beyond just money, right? You mentioned individuals making contributions in other fields.
Absolutely. It's multifaceted. Take Gao Qingjian winning the Nobel Prize for Literature.
Mm.
Xiaogu notes, interestingly, that because he took French citizenship, he wasn't technically the first mainland-born Chinese winner, but his identity as part of the diaspora highlights this global movement of talent.
That's a subtle but important distinction. And Dr. Patrick Soon-Shiong again.
Perfect example of that Hawaii experience. Born in South Africa, lived in Canada, becomes this medical pioneer and the wealthiest person in Los Angeles. That global mobility.
And in culture. Film, maybe.
Oh, definitely. Think Ang Lee or John Woo.
Mm-hmm.
Hugely influential directors who brought their Hong Kong filmmaking style to Hollywood and found massive success.
Right, Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, Face Off, huge hits.
Exactly. And Hong Kong cinema itself has this incredible global reach, sometimes rivaling Hollywood or Bollywood in specific regions. That's diaspora influence right there.
And there are others. Iris Chang.
Yes, the historian. Her powerful work on the rape of Nanking had such an impact. It actually led to a museum being established in Nanjing based on her research. A profound legacy.
Incredible. And music icons, too, like Yo-Yo Ma, Lang Lang.
Both huge global stars. Yo-Yo Ma, French-born, Boston-based. Lang Lang, moving from China to international fame from New York. They connect with audiences everywhere.
It shows the diaspora isn't just about business. It's shaping global culture, global conversations.
Enriching them, pushing boundaries. We could also mention Cheryl Wudon, the author.
Co-author of Half the Sky, right, based on that Chinese proverb.
That's the one. Chinese-American perspective reaching a massive audience, or even in sports. Jeremy Lin.
Linsanity, that was huge.
It really was. Transcended sports. Kerr points out his marketability even surpassed Yao Ming's in some metrics. And he became this really visible figure for Asian American evangelical Christians.
Interesting contrast with someone like Tim Tebow, maybe, in terms of how that religious identity was received publicly.
Yeah, different dynamic. And then there's the really intriguing case of Alberto Fujimori in Peru.
Ah, yes, you mentioned Peru. He wasn't ethnically Chinese, though, was he? Japanese ancestry.
Correct, Japanese ancestry. But Peru has this very large, very old Chinese community, the oldest in Latin America, in fact.
Okay.
So Fujimori strategically ran for president as El Chino, the Chinaman, tapping into that community's presence, or at least the perception of it.
And he won, beating a Nobel laureate.
He did. Beat Mario Vargas Llosa, became Peru's first ethnic minority president. It shows the potential political weight, even indirectly, on the diaspora.
Wow, and those chifas you hear about in Lima, the Chinese-Peruvian restaurants.
Exactly, a perfect symbol of that deep cultural fusion that's happened over generations.
Okay, so we have this picture, huge scale, wide distribution, deep economic and cultural influence. Now let's get into some of the broader implications discusses. This is where it gets really thought-provoking, I think.
Yeah, he draws out some fascinating connections. One key idea is business as mission.
Okay, what does that entail?
Well, because of that entrepreneurial streak we see so often, Chinese diaspora members frequently set up shop in these crucial global gateway locations.
Like where?
Think Panama Canal Zone, New York City, Hawaii, places that are major crossroads for trade and travel.
Ah, strategic spot.
Exactly. So these locations naturally become points of contact and influence. They can be seen as fields for mission outreach, but also places where diaspora members themselves act as bridges between cultures.
That makes a lot of sense. Being at the crossroads gives you unique leverage for connection. And what about urbanization?
Yeah, that's another big one. The Chinese diaspora tends to concentrate heavily in large cities around the world, maybe even more so than some other migrant groups.
And since what? Over half the world lives in cities now?
Right, since 2008 or so. This urban concentration across all economic levels positions the diaspora as a significant influencing factor within these major global hubs. It's like that old saying, location, 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 but on a global urban scale.
And the idea of mobilizing specific groups within the diaspora, like the Huaqiao and Huai.
Precisely. Those highly educated, culturally impactful segments
Yeah.
suggest that in many Asian societies, which can be sort of hierarchical.
Top-down influence.
Yeah, leveraging the networks and resources of these successful diaspora figures in film, business, politics, whatever, could create a really significant ripple effect. It could open doors for broader engagement.
Okay. And universities, you mentioned their presence there earlier.
Yes, it's quite notable.
Yeah.
You see a disproportionately high representation of Chinese individuals and Asians more broadly in top universities globally, both as students and faculty.
Right.
And highlights their increasing involvement in Christian campus groups, too, which is interesting given the secular trends on many campuses.
And he notes a difference in focus between mainland students and maybe others.
He does. He points out that mainland Chinese students often lean heavily towards science and tech fields, whereas diaspora students might be more spread across disciplines, including humanities. It raises interesting questions about, faith and science and how those conversations happen within the community.
And despite being settled elsewhere, those ties back to the homeland, the ethnic identity, seem to remain pretty strong.
They often do. These persistent ethnic connections allow overseas Chinese to act as cultural ambassadors, bridge builders.
Like Jeremy Lin playing for China in the Olympics. Or Michael Chang, even though they grew up in the U.S.
Exactly. Those are perfect examples. It really highlights the importance of community, of shared identity, maybe over strict national borders in some contexts.
And the religious dimension seems particularly compelling. Asia's generally very religious, isn't it?
Deeply religious.
Yeah.
Yeah, even mentions Lee Kuan Yew, Singapore's former leader, talking about a spiritual hunger in rapidly modernizing East Asia. And what's fascinating is that Chinese living overseas often identify as Christian at higher rates than in mainland China, even in countries where Christianity isn't the dominant religion.
Like Singapore, it's very multicultural.
Exactly. Singapore has a large, vibrant Christian Chinese population. And get this, Indonesia.
The world's largest Muslim nation.
Right. Indonesia actually has the largest Protestant Chinese population outside of mainland China.
Wow, that is genuinely surprising. It really underscores the potential in these maybe less obvious parts of the diaspora.
And because they're so spread out globally, you find Chinese communities in places you might not expect across Africa, Central Asia, sometimes sort of hidden or forgotten populations.
Right.
These could be unreached groups from a missional perspective. Or if there are Christian communities, they could be untapped sources of local leadership and influence.
Which leads to another idea it raises, the diaspora as a potential missionary force itself.
Yeah, it's a powerful concept.
Yeah.
You see examples like Indonesian Chinese Christians being active in sharing their faith within Indonesia, or movements like the Back to Jerusalem vision, which originates among Chinese Christians.
Suggesting a kind of reverse mission.
Exactly. Where the flow isn't just west to east, but also from the majority world, including the diaspora, sending missionaries out globally, maybe even back to the West, or to mainland China.
And this global presence, with potentially more freedom of speech, could also lead to unique theological contributions.
That's a key point. Diaspora Chinese thinkers and theologians operating outside potential restrictions in the mainland have this opportunity to develop and articulate distinct perspectives within global Christianity.
Kind of linking theology and practice, maybe? Like Paul in the early church.
That's the kind of parallel Ye draws, bridging theological reflection with the realities of mission and cross-cultural life. But he also adds a word of caution.
About assimilation.
Right, that the process of integrating into host cultures could potentially dilute that unique voice over time. It's a tension.
Okay. And finally, just the sheer number of Christians within China itself. That has huge implications for what's called world Christianity, doesn't it?
Absolutely massive. Estimates vary, but even conservative figures put the Christian population in China at a very substantial percentage, maybe 5%, 10%, potentially making it the second largest Christian nation in the world in absolute numbers after the U.S.
Which means China's role in the future of global Christianity is just undeniable.
Undeniable. It's a central theme in Philip Jenkins' work, The Next Christendom. And Sun Chan-Ra adds that crucial layer about how Christianity in the West itself is shifting towards ethnic minority communities.
Making the study of the Chinese diaspora even more relevant there, too.
Exactly. And Mark Knoll offers another nuance suggesting the growth of Christianity in China and majority world isn't necessarily a direct result of, say, American influence, but more of a parallel development.
Meaning Chinese Christianity, both at home and abroad, has its own distinct trajectory.
Precisely. A unique path shaped by its own history and context.
Wow. So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's just abundantly clear, isn't it? The Chinese diaspora is so much more than just a historical side note.
Oh, absolutely. It's this massive, incredibly influential, and yeah, often underestimated global force.
Actively shaping economies, cultures, even the global landscape of faith.
And we've seen how those four waves, the Huashang, Huagong, Huaqiao, Huai, created this incredibly diverse, interconnected global community.
Their impact is felt everywhere, often in really surprising ways.
Yeah, the implications we touched on, business, universities, potential missionary force, theological contributions, it really highlights the reach and maybe the untapped potential there.
It's not just scattered communities, it's a dynamic, increasingly vital player on the world stage.
This whole exploration really drives home how interconnected our world is, doesn't it? How the movement of people shapes things in profound, sometimes hidden ways.
Definitely. So maybe here's a final thought for you, the listener. Consider all the ways that the movement and influence of people groups across the globe are silently shaping things. Not just economies and cultures, but the very fabric of belief, of global connection. What other seemingly invisible global forces might be out there, profoundly impacting our world in ways we're only just starting to grasp?
It's a great question to ponder. Something to keep thinking about long after this discussion.